Boker Tov, everyone. It's time once again for a taste of Torah. Our Torah portion this week is called Bo, and it's found in the book of Exodus. We call this in Hebrew the Parasha HaShavua, which means, Parsha means portion. Ha is the Hebrew definite article, the, and Shavua means week. And it ends up being a nicely rhythmic phrase, Parsha HaShavua. It's a great word for us to learn and add to our Jewish lexicon. But before I get to our Torah portion, I like to start with an excursus these days. So I'm going to take a moment to do an excursus on matzah, which we have, since biblical language was translated into English, called unleavened bread, but there's actually a proper technical word in English for what matzah is. It's actually, the right word is hardtack. All right, and I'll talk to you in a moment about the history of hardtack, but let me just say about the history of matzah itself. The matzah we know is the matzah of industrialization. The square, flat, very crisp, uniformly punctured matzah is the creation of the Industrial Revolution. And before that, matzah did not follow the same pattern. So if you were just to go directly back through European Jewish history, back to the very beginning, you would discover, well, what are we talking about? We're originally talking about a tortilla. There was no industrialized methodology for making it. It would be made at home in the simplicity of ancient and medieval Jewish homes. So how would it be made? You would simply add water to flour, make a product, flatten it out, and then you do what traditional cooks have always done. You either put it on a hot stone, or you have a hot plate, or like with a tandoori, you slam it on the inside of a baking oven, and then you peel it off, and there you have it. So it's a very simple product. Now, if you want to follow the full development of Jewish law and follow the principles of Ashkenazi Jewry up here to the 21st century, then you pretty much want to buy it out of the store, made, or you can get boxes of what's called matzah shmura. That's especially watched over matzah from the land of Israel. It tends to be round rather than square. It is handmade, but there is some processing, and it's usually like burnt to a crisp. But in any case, if you're not feeling bound by that particular idea that you have to follow the excruciating rules of producing matzah according to the most mikdachtech, the most precise Ashkenazi Jewish tradition, well, then make some at home. It won't be kosher in the sense of what your manufactured matzah will be like, because your oven simply can't reach the temperatures that halakha, Jewish law, requires for making matzah. But I mean, honest to God, it was good enough for the first 2,000 years. Why not? So if you want to make matzah at home with your children and follow the basic rules, you add water, and within 18 minutes you have to have it baked. You crank your oven up to the maximum temperature. Why not? It'll be as good or bad or mediocre as any matzah you can buy. It might even be a little softer, a little more flexible than the matzah you're used to, but that would be just great too. So going back to the idea of the word hardtack. This is bent company hardtack. They call it celebrated hardtack. I think that's probably a misnomer. But hardtack is really the English equivalent of matzah, and it was invented during the age of exploration because one needed to take provisions that would last a very long time on board ships that would be gone for months or perhaps years at sea. So sailors across Europe and the provisioners who provided them started creating these dry biscuits. Just like matzah, it was made out of water, patted into a biscuit, and then it was baked. And the strategy was it was baked again. The Royal Navy, who used huge amounts of hardtack to supply the British Navy around the world, required that it be baked 4 times. So you've extracted all of the moisture out of it. It is just a brick. It is a carbohydrate brick. That doesn't make it invulnerable to problems. Common problems were infestations of weevils and other bugs. It would also, over time, might be exposed to enough moisture that it started to flourish a bit. And so, of course, Navy food was infamously terrible. Americans, the Bent Company started producing American-made hardtack in 1801, again, mostly to supply ships at sea, but it also played an important role in supplying American soldiers during the various 19th century campaigns, and especially in the Civil War. The solution to hardtack is exactly, you have to put it in a solution. So what would happen was that you would either soak it in water, or dip it in your coffee, or drop it into a bowl of soup, or fry it with some grease in a pan, and that would make it more or less edible. The strategy of breaking it up and sort of drinking it as a slurry in your coffee was very popular, because that would cause all the bugs to float to the top, and you could sort of pluck them out of the drink before you chugged it all down. So with that in mind, it's time to go on to our Torah portion, Parashat Bo, which means go, actually it means come. Sorry, come to Pharaoh, meaning go and address Pharaoh. What's happened in our previous portion is that we've had the first 7 plagues. And there are some differentiations made into these plagues. The first 5 of these plagues, Pharaoh of his own free will rejects them. We are told that Pharaoh hardens his heart, like hardtack, and resists the idea of doing justice to the Israelites, releasing them to worship God. And so by the 6th plague, God says, I'm going to harden his heart. If he's going to be this difficult, we're just going to end in a spectacular fashion. So from that point on, God hardens Pharaoh's heart. He no longer seems to have the will to change his mind, and we endure the last and the most severe of the plagues. Now, realize that until we get to the 10th plague, the plague of the death of the firstborn, none of them are truly violent in the way we would normally characterize violence. Maybe having the land pummeled by flaming hail could be described as violent, but the boils and the animal plagues and the darkness are coercive, but not necessarily violent. All right. Now we have this distinction between the first 5 and the second 5 of the 10 commandments, of the 10 plagues, but then the 10th plague gets a standard of its own that's different from everything that's happened before. Let me read it to you. Moses then summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, go, pick out lambs for your families and slaughter the Passover offering. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the 2 doorposts, all the way across the 3 surfaces. None of you shall go outside of the door of your house until morning, for the Eternal, when going through to smite the Egyptians, will see the blood on the lintel of the 2 doorposts, and the Eternal will pass over the door and not let the mashchit, the destroyer, enter and smite your home. All right, so this is the distinction. The distinction is that for the previous 9 plagues, none of them have really directly impacted the Israelites. We are told, in fact, that in a number of the plagues, the Israelites are completely unaffected. In the most extraordinary of them, the darkness that sweeps over Egypt so that no man could see his brother, we are exempted from. We could see, the Egyptians can't see, which just raises all kinds of interesting questions. But the point is that we are, what's the word I want? Exempted. We are exempted from all of this. But now, in the 10th plague, the first plague that I'll note is truly, truly violent, we are no longer exempted. Now violence can reach us as easily as it can reach the Egyptians. And therefore we have to do something in order to protect ourselves in a way we didn't have to do before. First of all, I think that that's a wonderful idea of understanding the nature of using violence to achieve change. If you are looking for political or social or moral change, one can and sometimes has to use violence. But you have to understand that in choosing to do that, you're also accepting the likelihood of violence upon yourself. When we choose to fight in the most literal sense against something, we should anticipate that they will fight back and that we will suffer. There will be casualties all around, that no one can fully escape the effects of violence. I think that's a very important lesson in what is a narrative about dissent and resistance and an attempt to right an injustice. Once we choose violence, that becomes part of our experience also. That's the first lesson. And the second is the requirement that nonetheless, we need to speak up. We need to stake out our position and make it clear where we stand. The Israelites really haven't had to do that up to this point. But now, in the hours, in the day before the mashkit will come and strike Egypt, we have marked ourselves as Israelites. We have said, we are part of the resistance. We are not part of the system, inviting retaliation. So maybe violence in the form of the mashkit will not enter our homes, but violence in the form of retaliatory or angry Egyptians could. And that's a risk one has to take when really big issues are at stake. We have to be willing to put ourselves on the line in order to make the kind of change we want to change. This is universal. This is, if I dare say it, eternal. This has always been the way. This is the best of Israelite sacred storytelling for us moderns, because the nature of these things don't go away. It's always been this way. It always will be this way. It's not, the wrong question to ask is, did the Exodus really ever happen? But rather realize that the Exodus, with all of its challenges and difficulties and dangers, happens all the time, over and over again. And that's why the Exodus is, for at least for the Western world, one of the great paradigms for political struggle, for national independence, for overcoming an oppressor. Not just Jews, just like hardtack is not just matzah. It's something that everybody's used. So too, the story of the Exodus is a story that human beings across the world, across centuries, have used to understand their own experiences. So just realize that when we reenact this story, we are reenacting what I like to call the greatest story ever told, the great story of enslavement, oppression, and liberation and escape, the journey from exile and imprisonment to freedom and security. It's an amazing story that is as true today as it was 2,000, 3,000 years ago. So enjoy it. It's our story. Share it with our neighbors. they are part of this story also. It is the hardtack, the matzah of the human experience. See you next week, everybody.